the OSCPA social media platforms. Most participants are joining us online via the Zoom platform. Simultaneous interpretation into all OSCE languages is also provided in this platform, and you can choose the language of interpretation at the bottom of your screen. I kindly ask all participants to mute their microphones when not speaking. Likewise, please unmute your microphone only when given the floor. Kindly note that an advanced list of speakers for each agenda item has been duly received from our virtual table office. The list is now closed. We plan to conclude this meeting at 16:30 Vienna time. If our business carries on after that time, there will be no interpretation. Due to serious time constraints, we will ask all speakers to limit their interventions to 2 minutes. And we cannot guarantee that all speakers registered for the open debate will be able to speak with interpretation. We will, however, guarantee that at least one speaker per delegation that has signed up in advance will be given the floor. Please note that the electronic voting is still open for assembly and committee positions. During this plenary session, you will also be asked to vote electronically using your voter credentials. Please make sure you can access an electronic device during this meeting to be able to vote. With that said, I now give the floor to our President, Lord Bowness, to open the meeting. Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. Dear colleagues, may I first of all thank those who have been able to make the journey to Vienna and join in this plenary session. And at the same time, thank those who've connected, like myself, from many different places around our area to participate. Now, before we go any further, I will ask Deputy Secretary General Plenary to moderate parts of the meeting from Vienna. And let me just emphasize the point made by Gustavo that we are under serious time constraints to get through this agenda. And I would appreciate it if speakers could limit their interventions as much as possible. Lastly, should I experience technical difficulties and my system here crash, I will ask in advance that Vice President Azay Guliev, as Senior Vice President, take over and chair the meeting. So now, item 1. You have the agenda before you, and I ask for your agreement and adoption of the agenda. Anybody, any objections, any observations, please indicate either by raising your nameplate if in Vienna or indicating on the chat here if you're online. In the absence of anything, any communication of that kind,
We have a request from the head of the Russian delegation, Mr. Tolstoy, please.
Yes.
Большое спасибо, господин председатель. Уважаемые коллеги, хотел бы прояснить еще раз вопрос, связанный с регламентом нашей ассамблеи. В регламенте есть чрезвычайные пункты и есть дополнительные пункты. В регламенте сказано, что они принимаются большинством 2/3 от членов ассамблеи, а не от присутствующих в зале. Лорд Боннес вчера объяснил, что таково было решение бюро, но это решение никак не было доведено до национальных делегаций. Поэтому подобное нарушение регламента считаю для ассамблеи недопустимым и предлагаю снять с повестки дня этот вопрос. Спасибо.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tolstoy. I'm not quite clear what issue you're asking to be removed from the agenda. It's my belief, and I will ask the Secretariat to confirm this, that following the Bureau, the modalities of all the of this annual session was communicated. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize, but I'll ask the Secretariat to confirm that the Bureau decision has indeed been communicated.
Yes, Mr. President, with a letter from you and with the modalities of how the annual remote session would be conducted.
Thank you so much. So now may we proceed to vote on the adoption of the agenda. Those in favour, please indicate, as I say. No objections? Then the agenda is adopted. Item 2 is...
Mr. President, if I may,
Yes.
our Secretary General is requesting the floor.
Sorry?
Secretary General Montella.
Oh, right, sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we proceed with your address, I just wanted to recognize again, because we couldn't do it together with all the heads of institutions. So in the room, we have our former colleagues, Matteo Mecacci, who is the director of the ODIHR. And I just wanted to use 1 minute to recognize his presence, give him a present, and then we'll move on with your address. Thank you, Mr. President. Matteo. So you're a good friend of the Assembly. You have worked in the Assembly in senior leadership positions in the Bureau for many years. Thank you very much for the work that you've done in the Assembly, and thank you very much for becoming the director of the ODIHR with this impetus that you've put into the organization. We really appreciate your presence here, and we really appreciate the fact that together with the other heads of institutions, you have created a family spirit in the OSCE, an OSCE that wants to deliver, as I said yesterday in my statement, as a whole, and really focus on the end users of the OSCE product. So thank you very much for being here. I have a little present for you, and then we move on.
I know I've been in these meetings with some of you for a number of years, so it's really great to see you. We have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of work to do, but I look forward to seeing you in many elections observations to come. I'm sure the cooperation will continue to improve. I will continue to deliver on our very important mandate to strengthen democratic institutions and human rights. So thank you all, and look forward to engaging with you on a bilateral level pretty soon. Thank you.
That's okay. Mr. President, we are back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Roberto. And I, of course, add my greetings to Matteo. And we'll now proceed to my address. Madam Chairman, Mr. Secretary General, fellow parliamentarians and distinguished guests, can I first of all, before I say anything else, put on record our considerable distress at the reading and hearing and seeing of the devastation caused in 3 of our member states by uncontrollable fires, namely in Canada and the United States and Cyprus. And we extend our sympathy to our colleagues from those delegations, and indeed to all who are affected by those dreadful fires. Let me again welcome you to this remote session. As is obvious, I'm not able to travel to Vienna, but I'm glad that so many people are in the Hofburg. I wish I was with you, and so many people are online. We're encouraged by all this, that I hope by next February we will be able to gather in Vienna for our usual winter meeting. But we have to remain vigilant and remember that although progress may be made in our region or parts of our region, COVID will continue to impact on the world, and hence the activities of the Parliamentary Assembly in months and years to come. This being said, nobody can say for certain when we will be able to fully return to business as usual, especially as the rules on travel and the requirements for visitors entering countries and returning travelers on their way home will continue to change from country to country according to their circumstances. This has been an unprecedented period for the Parliamentary Assembly, like so many organisations and individuals. We've attempted to adapt and change to meet these challenges. And informal meetings, informal leadership meetings by means of video conferencing are now a regular occurrence. And I'm grateful to the International Secretariat for ensuring that they have acquired the expertise in organizing these conferences around the world. And indeed, we will see today, for the first time, voting on texts and candidates through secure electronic voting. I'm sure that these working practices that we have acquired will serve us well in the years to come. But in truth, our traditional meetings cannot, in my opinion, be replaced. And if indeed I needed to be convinced of this, 2 days sitting here, not speaking to you face to face, not feeling the atmosphere in the room, or not being able to gauge your reactions while listening to a speech, and after the meeting, not being able to meet and greet colleagues with whom one may have disagreed, has confirmed for me that, useful as virtual meetings are, they as yet do not replace the face-to-face diplomacy, which will remain limited by continued online activity. Fellow parliamentarians, the crisis has called on us to remain vigilant to protect the rights of parliaments. And throughout the region, we've seen countries adopt emergency measures and states of emergency to react rapidly and decisively to the multitude of challenges. And all this is understandable and may well have been justified to save lives, but it would be all too easy. And one has to be wary of executives that would like to permanently derogate from the normal process of making laws. We know how easy it is to transfer powers, and we know how difficult it is for us to get those back. Democratic process and true security require us that we exploit our role as parliamentarians. And this means not only debating laws, but giving a voice to our citizens to make sure that legislation truly answers the problems it seeks to address. And so there's the whole parliamentary process of considering legislation. And in the search for efficiency, we cannot regard our responsibilities or sacrifice that democratic debate and all the progress we hope to make and have made to strengthen parliaments across the OSCE region. Colleagues, within the OSCE, the Parliamentary Assembly continues to play a crucial role, and it's demonstrated during this year by the many matters that have come to our attention that peace and stability within the region are fragile, and they need our constant care and attention. We've seen in the South Caucasus the renewed armed conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh. Despite a sustainable ceasefire, thorny issues such as the danger of landmines and the question of prisoners of war will need to be resolved to pave the way for durable peace. In Georgia, we yet to see any progress on a number of issues still dividing communities, and there's no significant progress towards the implementation of existing agreements in Belarus, in Ukraine, for some time. In Belarus, we are worried about the escalation of, as we see it, of the violation of human rights and democratic principles witnessed last summer, not least by the grounding of the Ryanair flight and the arrest of opposition activist and journalist Roman Protasevich. We also, if one's looking at conflicts that remain unresolved, we mustn't forget Moldova and the question of Transnistria, where the OSCE continues to play a useful part, but the actual conflict itself remains unresolved. I've underlined on many occasions it's within the role of the PA to exchange with as many stakeholders as possible, including opposition figures, so that we can show the kind of challenges we face. This is why we have scrutinized the conditions in which Alexei Navalny was arrested, and will continue to monitor how he's treated in detention. This is why we advocate the broadest participation of civil society in the work of the OSCE. That's why our members continue to actively participate in our election observation missions. We all seek to bring sides closer to each other to deliver the promises of Helsinki. Madam Chair of the OSCE, I take this opportunity to thank you for your presence here today, to reiterate our strong support, not only for OSCE principles, but for your chairpersonship and the work of the Secretariat and the OSCE institutions. It's in our interest that we continue to reinforce your work to deliver concrete results for our citizens. And I'm encouraged by the good working relationships we've already established with the heads of those institutions, Secretary General Schmidt, Director Matachi, High Commissioner Abraham Kamanov, and Representative Ribeiro. OSCE continues to have a meaningful impact on the lives of everybody, even if they're not always aware of it. And when properly equipped and armed with a clear mandate, the OSCE remains one of the best vehicles to deliver results. Because we're convinced it has a significant role to play in our multilateral system, we need to continue generating discussions and ideas to make the OSCE more effective. Many of you have already participated in our call for action. I just want to emphasize that we do not intend in that work for that the PA should dictate solutions either to the Permanent Council or the Ministerial Council, but rather that we seek ways in which the Parliamentary Assembly could assist you in your work. And as we get closer to the Helsinki Final Act, we need to carry on supporting those initiatives. We also have to channel our political energy into being vocal within our national parliaments and our governments to support the work of the OSCE and the implementation of commitments. Until the OSCE is high on the agenda of national parliaments, national governments, it will be difficult to ensure the recognition of the organization and its work receive the recognition it deserves. It is my personal view, and I emphasize this is not the personal view, this is not the view of the leadership, the Bureau or the Standing Committee, but I believe that we should all commit ourselves in our respective countries to pressing for there to be a summit to mark on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of Helsinki. This, I think, would ensure that OSCE and the problems that we saw at the end of the previous year, when for a time there were no heads of the executive institutions, it will ensure that national governments have got to pay some attention to the OSCE and not brush it to one side. So I would like to see that happen. Whether it will or not, I do not know. But I point out to members of the Assembly that there has not been a summit since 2010. That is a long time, especially in an organization which national governments claim to recognize as important and which has faced the sort of problems that it has. Now, colleagues, when I took over the presidency some 7 months ago, I made it very clear that I would not be running for the presidency. I also made it clear that I had some clear objectives, making sure that we were able to meet today for an annual session, regardless of circumstances, and to elect a new leadership was one of them. And I'm very glad that that has come to pass. I also wanted to hand over the Assembly in good order and without undue commitments to my successor. I hope that I have been able to achieve that. I'd like to thank colleagues in the Bureau and the Standing Committee for their support in ensuring that we're here to make decisions and vote remotely, and indeed for their support and friendship offered to me as a president imposed on you by the rules and not elected by a popular vote. It's been a considerable honor, if unexpected, to have served this organization and as president. And I've tried to fulfill my responsibilities in very strange times, but nevertheless, I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to serve. I want to thank the International Secretariat for their efforts in ensuring that our changes go smoothly and continue with the work I know that they have in mind for coming months until we are, as it were, operating, as I said previously, as business as usual. Can I just, out of the many members of the International Secretariat led by Roberto Montella and his deputies, mention the presidential advisor, like Paul Paulin, who has tried to keep a president operating from his home in Surrey with only an iPad and an elderly computer on the road. And I thank you, Loic, for all the help that you have given me. And I now recognize what an important role the presidential advisor is. At the end of this session, we will have a new president and a new bureau. I wish them every success, and I assure them of my very full support. And I will look forward to supporting whoever is the president, supporting them in the work which they do, in turn supporting the OSCE. Now, before I finish, and you will be glad to know that I have finished my address, I would just like to mention that, of course, at the end of a period, any period, we find ourselves losing members who have served the Assembly incredibly well. I know that we are going to lose our special representative, Toriel Einsam from Norway, the special representative on Arctic issues, and also Elena Osce, and I thank them for the work that they have done and the contributions that made. Lastly, we are also losing Mrs. Doris Barnett, who has the remarkable record of having occupied every possible position in the Parliamentary Assembly leadership, with the exception of President. And it is an incredible record. And Vice President, Treasurer, Committee Chairman, Committee Rapporteur, Head of the German Delegation, Annual Session Host, an Election Observation Mission Special Coordinator and Head of Delegation, to say nothing of the Leinsweiler seminars, which she ensured were hosted by the German Bundestag. That is a remarkable record, and I know that we will want to put on record our thanks to Doris Barnett for that she has done. And on a personal basis, may I say I will miss her company at these meetings. I have always found Doris Barnett very easy to work with on the rules and working practices. And so, both as President on your behalf and personally, I take this opportunity of wishing her well as she leaves the Assembly and indeed the Bundestag.
Doris, please come to the podium. Doris, please, if you can come here. We'll just take 1 minute to recognize Doris.
was and still is today an honor to be with you, because just think how many people we represent. Millions. And just think how few we are, and that we should all be proud to represent our people. Just those few of us, we represent millions, and we should all be proud to be able to do so. And therefore, we should always try our best to do the best for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris.
We now come to item number 3. We now come to item number 3, the address by the chairperson in office of the OSCE, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden, Mrs. Ann Linde. We're glad to welcome you again to one of our meetings, Mrs. Linde, and I will ask you to take the floor and let us have your thoughts. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you very much, President Lord Bowness, Excellencies. Thank you for inviting me to the plenary session of the OSCE PA annual meeting. I'm grateful for the opportunity to interact with you again. Like you, I am today keenly awaiting the election of a new president of the Parliamentary Assembly. I look forward to a close cooperation with the new president throughout the Swedish chairpersonship. As chairperson in office, I've seen firsthand important contributions made by the Parliamentary Assembly in support of the OSCE common commitments. Your knowledge and networks add an important perspective to discussions in the organization. Your role in election observation is of key importance in support of democracy, and as parliamentarians, you are an indispensable link between the people in the participating states and the work of the OSCE. During my travel as CIO, I have met with several of those of you who represent countries hosting field missions and seen firsthand how you translate the commitments and principles of the OSCE into your everyday parliamentary work. Excellencies, the Swedish chairpersonship has now reached the halfway point. Over the past months, we have pursued our priorities as I presented them to you in February. Focuses lies firmly on safeguarding respect for the European security order, defending the concept of comprehensive security, including democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, and contribution to conflict resolution in accordance with the OSCE commitments and principles, which are all based on international law and the UN Charter. In order to make progress, gender equality and the involvement of civil society remain key importance. The first part of our chairpersonship has of course been affected by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to express my condolences to all of you for the suffering your countries have endured as a result of this terrible disease. Despite the challenges posed by the pandemic, the OSCE has continued to find ways to perform its role and its tasks. This perseverance shows strength. Excellencies, one of the truly valuable features of OSCE lies in the unique field presence this organization has set up. During the first 6 months, I have prioritized seeing these activities firsthand and have now visited nearly all of them. During my visits, I have included meetings with parliamentarians wherever possible. As an example, I appreciated the opportunity to interact with the delegation to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly of North Macedonia during my visit to Skopje last month. What I have seen during my visit has filled me with hope for a better and more secure future through that cooperation the OSCE fosters. At the same time, I have also seen challenges that follow in the wake of conflict. Over the past year alone, One of the conflicts in our region has claimed thousands of lives and affected many more. It is clear that the OSCE is needed more than ever and that our shared commitments and activities do make a difference. We need to intensify our efforts to conflict resolution in line with the principles of the Helsinki Final Act and the Charter of Paris. Ukraine was the first country I visited and also the first country I have visited twice as CIO. This shows the importance that I, as CIO, attach to the conflict in and around Ukraine. In view of the challenges to the European security order that this conflict represents, I have expressed my support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, as well as conflict resolution in accordance with international law and commitments and principles of the OSCE. I have also pointed to the difficult humanitarian and human rights situation and the need to open all crossing points along the contact line. During my trips to Georgia and Moldova, I got first-hand impressions on how the small but valuable confidence-building steps that OSCE and others carry out in support of conflict resolution help improve life of people of both sides of the conflict lines and help them get access to basic humanitarian needs. 6 months after the ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan, unresolved issues remain. Incidents along the border and mine explosion causing casualties still happen. I therefore welcome the 2 instances where Armenian prisoners have been able to return to Armenia and that Azerbaijan gained access to information needed for demining, most recently this past weekend. These are positive steps, an important confidence-building measure, and I urge the sides to continue in this manner. The progress has been possible through a series of diplomatic engagement by Georgia, the United States, Russia, and the EU, with support from our chairpersonship. I'm hopeful that this lays the ground for further much-needed confidence-building measures, including those that can be implemented through my personal representative, and that it creates a climate conducive to talks under the auspice of the Minsk Group's co-chairs. During my visits to Armenia and Azerbaijan in March, I discussed the role of the OSCE to support a comprehensive peace agreement. I reiterated my full support for the Minsk Group co-chairs and offered the OSCE various tools, including my personal representatives to assist. The visits I made to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan in April gave me valuable insights on the regional dynamics and the important role that the OSCE field mission play in contributing to comprehensive security. The value of personal contact became even more apparent to me when tensions flared up on the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in April, and I had the possibility to interact directly with my Kyrgyz and Tajik colleagues in support of a peaceful resolution. During the course of May and June, I have visited Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. On Thursday this week, I will also visit Kosovo. It is clear that the OSCE field presence in Southeast Europe have a strong value in support of these countries' reform in line with the OSCE commitments. The importance of strength and gender equality and involvement of civil society have also been a key component in my visits there. After the visit to Kosovo this week, I will have visited 12 out of the OSCE 16 field missions. Excellencies, the situation in Belarus is of continued great concern. As CIO, I have called on Belarus to adhere to all its international obligations, including its international commitments in terms of media freedom and human rights as an OSCE participating state. The forced landing of a civilian plane to arrest journalist Roman Protasevich represents deeply disturbing and reckless behavior. I have called on Belarus to release Mr. Protasevich and Ms. Sofia Sapega immediately. The offer I made last year, together with the former Albanian chair, to facilitate a genuine dialogue between the regime and the Belarusian opposition still stands. Unfortunately, recent developments have made progress even more difficult. Excellencies, our efforts as CIO have also focused on strengthening our joint commitments and principles through conferences and meetings. With the CIO Conference on Media Freedom, organized in May, together with the OSCE representative of freedom of the media, we sought to highlight the importance of media freedom and the right to freedom of opinion, expression, and information. This is key components of the comprehensive security concept. To me as CIO, tolerance and non-discrimination is of great importance. Therefore, as our first CIO event in early February, we organized an expert meeting on combating anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. In June, a retreat was organized with my 3 special representatives on these issues and participants from various OSCE structures. In May, we also organized a retreat with my special and personal representatives who are dealing with conflict formats in the OSCE to discuss their experiences of promoting women, peace and security, and inclusive processes. In June, I was invited to a hearing in the United States Congress with the US Helsinki Commission, where some of you who participated in this meeting were present. I was grateful for the opportunity to share my perspective as CIO and the insightful discussion that followed. I've also appreciated the opportunities to brief and interact with UN Security Council and the Council of Europe on the activities and priorities of the chairpersonship. Excellencies, the confidence and security building measures are crucial parts of the OSCE's work in the political and military dimension. In 2020, I regretted that the US chose to leave the Open Sky Treaty with reference to lacking Russian compliance. Today, I regret that Russia has also decided to withdraw from the treaty. The challenges to this important confidence and security building instrument is serious in a time where the need for it and similar instrument is greater than at any time since the Cold War. Excellencies, the OSCE can only be as effective as we, the participating state, allow it to be. Decision-making by consensus requires that all participating states take responsibility for the ability of the whole organization to deliver on its mandate. What we are experiencing right now in negotiation of the unified budget and regarding the holding of the annual security review conference and the human dimension implementation meeting worries me. When one participating state, not always the same, takes decision making hostage in the seemingly unrelated issues, it harms the credibility of the organization. As participating states, we need to overcome these challenges. As chairpersonship, we are doing our best to facilitate solutions, but in order for our organization to be successful, constructive engagement is needed by all. Excellencies, we look forward to the second half of our chairpersonship, where focus is gradually shifting towards preparation for the meeting of the Ministerial Council in Stockholm in December. I know that many challenges remain, but I'm equally sure that through the strong institutions of the OSCE and the cooperation in good faith between participating states, we will find a way forward. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister Lind, for your address this morning, which I think we will all have listened to with great interest, both sharing your experiences and so far and your and indeed your views. I'm very, very grateful, and I'm sure as the whole assembly. We haven't, because of time constraints, I'm afraid, able to hold a question and answer session with you. But can I remind colleagues that they can, according to our rules, submit questions to the chair in office in accordance with Rule 42.4. So I hope that doesn't mean that you've got a huge postbag as a result of what I said, Minister, but I just need to remind colleagues that they are not being deprived of any opportunities to put questions to you. So once again, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. President, we can hear you. You can move to point number 4.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought for everything went quiet for a minute. I thought, oh, this is not what I need. Item 4, colleagues, is the consideration of urgency items. This is the item on the agenda where I think I shall earn my money. And I just ask for your cooperation in dealing with this, because it is not going to be easy. We're going to now consider the urgency items, and as it's laid out in the provisional rules for emergency situations and online meetings during the current pandemic, questions of urgency may be placed on the agenda of the Assembly on the proposal of the Standing Committee. Yesterday, the Standing Committee was asked to pronounce on the inclusion of the 3 proposed urgency items, and it did not recommend adding those texts to our agenda. That was a decision that had to be made, a consensus -1, and that proved not to be possible. However, the rules of procedure also provide for the proposers of those urgency items rejected by the Standing Committee to appeal in writing to the Assembly for their inclusion. And appeals in writing have been received in respect of all 3. And these are addressing the rise in hate, intolerance, violence and discrimination across the OSCE region, proposed by Senator Cardin from the United States. Second, the general approach to dissent in Belarus, proposed by Farah Karimi from the Netherlands. And thirdly, the destabilizing military buildup by the Russian Federation near Ukraine in the temporarily occupied autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sebastopol, Ukraine, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, proposed by the leader of the Ukrainian district, Potorayev, from Ukraine. Now, there are a number of stages that we have to go through. We have to first of all decide by a majority of 2/3 of votes cast whether to place the proposal on the agenda. Each of these proposals will be voted on consecutively with a 10-minute voting window. For each of the proposals, I will give the floor to one speaker in favour and one speaker against, if any, for 1 minute. We will then have to have a recess of 10 minutes to complete the 10-minute voting window. And once the voting on the first text is closed, we will announce the result and proceed with the vote on the next proposed urgency item using the same process. Once that set of votes is decided, and we're talking here about whether to include the items on the agenda, not whether you agree with them. Once the Assembly decides to place an item on the agenda, you will be asked to vote again to approve the item by a simple majority of votes cast. Since the arguments are likely to have been made for and against in seeking to have the item included, we won't be accepting any further speakers. For each of these votes, we will again establish the 10-minute voting window. And to make the best use of our time, we'll proceed to the next agenda item and hear about election observation missions while the vote goes on. So the first phase is, should the texts be included, should the texts be included on the agenda? So we will begin with the votes to decide. We will begin with the resolution from a draft resolution from Senator Cardin, whom I will ask to propose the resolution be included. Senator Cardin, you have the floor.
Well, Mr. President, first, thank you very much for your leadership in allowing us to have a process to meet. I also want to thank the Austrian delegation for allowing us to have these meetings here in Vienna. The urgency of the rise of hate is obvious in all of our countries. We've seen an incredible increase in the number of hate-related violence in minority communities. I could cite many specific examples, including the loss of 4 Muslims and 3 generations in Canada in June. I could cite the example of Germany, where a military person is being tried for violence in the refugees, planning violence in refugee communities. I could talk about 2 African Americans killed in the United States by white supremacists within the last week. The urgency is clear. We had a discussion about this at the standing committee, and I want to thank my friends from Azerbaijan and Turkey for suggesting some modifications that would make the resolution, which I think is well drafted, more clear as it relates to anti-Muslim activities. So I urge my colleagues to support putting this on the agenda. I will seek recognition to make a unanimous consent request at a later point, but I want to thank everyone for their cooperation. That's how I think we remain relevant as the premier organization in regards to basic rights, even during the COVID-19 pandemic and a hybrid type of annual meeting. I thank you for your attention. I ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. I call on anybody who wishes to speak against the inclusion of this urgency item on the agenda. And if there is anyone, and there is 1 minute. Is there no one?
We don't see anybody here in the room, Mr. President.
And I see nobody on the screen. Good. So we will now have a recess until the 10-minute voting window is complete. The meeting is adjourned for 10 minutes only.
Kažem da ne idu kući dok ne pošalju saopštenje. Pošto oni odu, ako nema sednice, nema greške. I petak Vesna je bila, imala onaj, šta beše imala i oni kažu oni kao ne. U stvari ono kad ste na odboru vas dve, to je kako ponedjeljak izašlo.
Dear members, please note that the vote is now closed.
I understand that voting is now finished and that the results are available. Agree, Mr. Gustavo?
Yes, Mr. President, I do not see the results from where I am
Okay,
on the screen, but I believe you have them.
I have them, so you're okay at that end for them to go ahead, yes? Right. The results of the vote, the electronic vote, 101 in favor, 15 against, and 10 abstentions, which means that those in favor amount to 80.16% of the votes cast. Therefore, the item has been added to the agenda. Now, we now proceed to the next item, where the decision is needed. This is the general approach to dissent in Belarus.
Sorry, Mr. President, we have
Yeah,
a
yeah.
request from the floor, Senator Cardin from the US.
Maybe I misunderstood. Are we going to go through all three before we take them up? So I can hold off till the other two have been voted on.
Yes, now there will be a consecutive voting on the other two. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to decide whether to include make the decision as to include or not include in respect of all three, first of all, okay?
Yes, Mr. President, you can proceed now with the second.
Right, okay, so we're continuing with the general approach to dissent in Belarus, proposed by Farah Karimi. Voting on the electronic platform is open for the next 10 minutes. I'm calling Ms. Karimi to present the proposal for 1 minute, and thereafter I will ask for anybody who wishes to speak against the inclusion to speak for a further minute. Ms. Karimi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, it is an enormous disappointment that there was not a consensus in the Standing Committee to put our urgency item on the general approach to dissent in Belarus on the plenary agenda. I am calling on you to vote for putting this item on our agenda today. It is urgent, it is relevant, and it is core to our work and values as parliamentarians, as representatives of people of OSCE region, to speak out and to speak up against systematic and constantly deteriorating human rights situation in Belarus. Yesterday, Euronews published an interview with a human rights activist, quoting her, and I am quoting, "Today, we are living in a big prison. People are arrested every day, not for organizing demonstrations. There are no more demonstrations in Minsk. It is too dangerous. They can arrest you just because of a sticker, for example, or because your shirt is white and red, the colors of the opposition." End of quote. We, as representatives of people, must side with the population of Belarus. I call on you to vote for this resolution. Belarusian authorities must end the suppression of their own people and free all political prisoners. Thank you.
Does anybody wish to speak against the inclusion of this item? Please indicate. Everybody get in? Anybody indicating in the chamber, Gustavo?
No, nobody requesting the floor here, Mr. President.
Right. In which case we will now proceed.
Sorry, Mr. President.
Sorry?
Mr. Tolstoy, head of the Russian delegation, please.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Tolstoy.
Я хочу еще раз привлечь ваше внимание, всех собравшихся в этом зале, что представители Белоруссии лишены возможности работать вместе с вами, лишены абсолютно диким способом при содействии Польши, Литвы и Австрии. Я еще раз заявляю решительный протест в связи с тем, что иммунитет парламентариев не уважается и в связи с тем, что наше сегодняшнее собрание обсуждает темы, которые вносят конфронтацию в нашу организацию. Я имею в виду и этот пункт, и следующий пункт. Господин Савиных, представляющий Белоруссию, сейчас находится с нами на видеосвязи, но он из-за работы секретариата не может выступить. Мы категорически возражаем против попытки политизации событий в Беларуси, против ярлыков, которые навешивают как в адрес Беларуси, так и в адрес России, абсолютно потерявшие здравый смысл люди в Западной Европе. Мы будем и дальше отстаивать наш суверенитет, наши законы и нашу возможность в соответствии с нашими законами действовать на территории того или иного государства. Абсолютно ложные обвинения в адрес руководства Белоруссии, сфабрикованные так называемой оппозицией, которую кормят с руки правительства ряда стран, не имеют никакого значения, никакой силы и никакой легитимности. Предлагаю снять этот вопрос с рассмотрения. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tolstoy. We will now have a 10-minute recess whilst the voting takes place. You should have a voting, it should be on your screen. And that will be enable you to vote yes or no. We have a now recess for 10 minutes. I can now give the results of the vote on whether to include the urgency item on the general approach to dissent in Belarus on the agenda. Are you hearing of me, Gustavo?
Yes, Mr. President, I think you can announce the results.
Right. Colleagues, we have the result which of the ballot, which I will now announce. Those in favor of placing the item on the I'm sorry, at this minute I can't do it because the result was on my screen and it has now disappeared with some reference to saying consensus has been reached, which I did. It's come back. Right, those in favor of placing it on the agenda, 82, those against 25, though abstentions 15, therefore 67.21% of the votes cast were in favor, 20.49% were against, and 12 abstentions, and it's therefore 2/3 of the votes cast were in favor. It will therefore be placed on the agenda. We will in due course whether or not it's approved. In the first instance, we have to continue with destabilizing the military buildup by the Russian Federation near Ukraine in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sebastopol, Ukraine, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, proposed by Mr. Potereev from the Ukraine. Again, there will be a voting platform open for 10 minutes. I will ask Mr. Potereev to present his proposal for a minute. I will ask if there's anybody against to speak against the inclusion of the item for another minute, and there will be another recess of 10 minutes whilst the voting takes place. Mr. Potereev, you have the floor.
If I may, Mr. President, before just a quick announcement for those members that are here physically in Vienna, due to the high number of connections here in the room, if you have any difficulty connecting, you can step outside the room and do the connection for the voting. It will be much easier. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues, what's the urgency of our item? Yesterday, I told you that Ukrainian military medic was killed. Today, unfortunately, I have to tell you that Ukrainian captain, logistic captain, he wasn't even in the front line, father of 4 children was killed, and another 3 Ukrainian soldiers were seriously wounded. What else will happen in the nearest future? What is the urgency? Kerch Strait is still blocked. The whole Azov Sea is blocked, is closed by Russian Federation. Coming days, Russian proxies and Russian sappers will put another hundreds of mines, old Soviet mines, which were produced for Afghan war. And I don't know how many Ukrainian sappers will be killed trying to mark at least borders of these fields of death, and how many civilians and how many children will be killed. Tomorrow, Russia will continue to issue its passports for occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk. And all these people will be involved in Russian elections in September. Okay, Russian elections maybe don't matter, but what is matter, colleagues, that war criminals are included in parties' lists for these September elections. And I ask you to think what we all will do when we meet them face to face here in this hall, probably next year. So that's why, distinguished colleagues, we call to react urgently today. because tomorrow we can face another much more serious challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now ask whether anybody wishes to speak against the inclusion of this item on our agenda. If they do, they have the floor for 1 minute.
Mr. Tolstoy, Russian Federation, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Tolstoy. You have the floor.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Все, что было перечислено господином Потураевым, не имеет никакого отношения к той абсолютно лживой резолюции, которую украинская делегация предлагает. Что касается убийств гражданских лиц, украинская армия продолжает убивать на своей территории, убивает женщин и детей, и это следствие гражданской войны, которая идет на Украине. Что касается Керчи и Черного моря, то, безусловно, уважение к территориальным водам Российской Федерации будет обеспечено в полной мере, вне зависимости от сказок про мины и саперов. Что касается российских паспортов, да, в Луганске и в Донецке живут наши граждане, и мы будем их защищать в том случае, если украинская хунта попытается опять военным способом принудить их к своему антиконституционному режиму. Это следствие действий украинских властей с 2014 года, желание граждан Донецка и Луганска обезопасить себя, получив российские паспорта. Уважаемые коллеги, хочу привлечь еще раз ваше внимание, что все, что здесь происходит, противоречит регламенту Ассамблеи. Мы начали играть в футбол и неожиданно перешли на хоккей. Решения принимаются без кворума. Напомню, что для принятия решения нужно 162 голоса, а по последним пунктам их было 120. Также хочу напомнить, что бюро не вправе изменять регламент Ассамблеи, в то же время ссылаясь на него. Именно такое письмо мы получили, в котором написано «большинство от 2/3 присутствующих». Вот это слово «присутствующих», оно и изменяет регламент, потому что в регламенте Ассамблеи сказано 2/3 от депутатов. Поэтому мы считаем, что если мы собрались здесь для того, чтобы обвинить Белоруссию и Россию в мнимых преступлениях, выдуманных абсолютно, то это не является целью Ассамблеи и лишает нашу работу всякого смысла. Именно поэтому, если решение о включении этого пункта будет принято, мы покинем Ассамблею. Сожалею об этом.
Hello? Gustavo, are you hearing me?
Yeah, Mr. President.
Yeah, sorry, I lost the end of Mr. Tolstoy's speech. The sound seemed to go. Have we concluded? Can we now move on to the vote?
Yes, Mr. President, the vote is going on at the moment. There are 7 minutes and 20 seconds.
Oh, sorry, well, I didn't. I hope everybody has got a better picture than I have. I've got a vote. There's no ballot bit on my message from the voting people. I only get it when I get the result. Not that it matters, but okay. If you are ready in the Hofburg, I can now announce the results of the vote on this resolution as to whether or not to include it on our agenda. Are you ready for the announcement of the result?
Yes, Mr. President, please go ahead.
Thank you. Those in favor of including it on the agenda, 84. Those against, 26. 14 abstentions. That means 67.74% of the votes cast were in favor. 20.97% of the votes cast were against, and 11.29 abstentions, which does in fact mean that there is a 2/3 majority of the votes cast, and the result, and this item will therefore be placed upon the agenda. Can I just take a second before we proceed, because I wanted to say to Mr. Tolstoy, whose comments I regret I lost in.
Mr. President, could you wait a second, because I'll ask Mr. Tolstoy to put his earplugs. One second.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. President. Mr. President, you are muted.
Can I'm hoping.
Yes, go ahead. We hear you now.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Thank you very much. Mr. Tolstoy, I'm sorry that I missed the end of your intervention before the vote, but for whatever reason, I lost the sound. But I have been advised of your statement and threat that you would leave the Parliamentary Assembly if this matter is passed. Well, we haven't actually got there yet. There's got to be a vote on whether the matter passes or not. And you also made some comments about the procedure that we are adopting, namely that it be 2/3 of the votes cast. I would just appeal to you, Mr. Tolstoy, to understand that we're working in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The rules don't specify what the 2/3 of the members actually means. And the only place in which that principle is followed in our rules is in connection with the appointment of the Secretariat, where it's quite clear that it's 2/3 of the votes cast. In the circumstances, the Bureau had no alternative but to make an interpretation. You will understand it's a virtually impossible situation to try and take a figure of all the members of this assembly, whether or not they have been registered for this meeting. I mean, I don't know whether your argument would be that those people who showed no interest at all, had no intention of coming, but who are technically members should be included in the calculation. But in any event, it's quite impractical. And I believe that my colleagues and I at the Bureau have made a reasonable proposal in connection with the emergency rules and procedure in saying that it would be 2/3 of the vote cast. I'm sorry that you don't find that acceptable. And equally, I am sorry that you feel it necessary to threaten us with the withdrawal of your membership, which, although you may not always feel it, is valued across the piece in this organization. And we would not be as strong without you as we are with you. So I hope you will understand that, but I hope you will also understand that neither the presidency nor the Bureau can actually accept threats. Otherwise, I don't know where we would end. This is a democratic body. Even if you don't like the procedures which we have adopted, they are democratic procedures, and they do depend upon votes being cast by people who are participating in this meeting. So I understand you say somebody else wants the floor. Is that Gustavo?
Yes, we have our Secretary General, Montella, and then we have 2 points of order from the delegations of Belarus and Russia.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also would like to express regret for this situation. I just wanted to clarify that Mr. Tolstoy didn't try to leave the assembly, just said that if the vote was going, if this item was going to be put on the agenda, he would leave the meeting. So there's not option there, just to clarify that.
Well, if I need to apologize, I'm sorry, but the message I got, and like I said, I didn't actually hear what Mr. Tolstoy said. If it's leaving the meeting, that's obviously a different kettle of fish. And what I said, basically, you may ignore.
Mr. President, we now have 2 points of order. Mr. Tolstoy, Russian Federation, please.
Спасибо большое. Я хочу поблагодарить лорда Боунеса и всех коллег за терпение. Я не хочу отнимать ваше время. Просто прошу меня понять. Мы против того, чтобы менять правила по ходу игры. Господин президент прекрасно знает, что в правиле 26 регламента Ассамблеи зафиксировано, что решение принимается 2/3 голосов членов Ассамблеи, а не членов Ассамблеи, находящихся в зале. И то, что бюро это правило произвольно трактует как 2/3 находящихся в зале, мы уже с этим сталкивались, когда господин Церетели объяснял нам, что он по WhatsApp получает голоса. Я еще раз привлекаю ваше внимание к тому, что сами мы превращаем нашу организацию в такой зал заседаний суда ограниченного количества стран и ограниченного количества участников, которые обсуждают 2 страны. Если вы считаете такой подход справедливым, мы в нем участвовать не будем. Мы не хотим конфронтации, мы хотим диалога. Но диалога в таком режиме с нарушениями регламента не будет. Еще раз повторяю, решения, принятые 120 голосами, не являются законными, потому что нет кворума. Как может лорд Боунес сейчас говорить о том, что есть какие-то гипотетические члены Ассамблеи? Они все, 323 депутата национальных парламентов, являются членами Ассамблеи. Если это не так, скажите мне, и я возьму все свои слова обратно. Но еще раз повторяю, если вы хотите работать по правилам, нужно их соблюдать. Если не хотите работать по правилам, если хотите принимать политизированные односторонние решения сами с собой, это ваше право. Но мы в этом участвовать не можем. Еще раз спасибо, извините, что отрываю у вас время.
Thank you, Mr. Tolstoy. There's not a great deal that I can add. Of course, I'm concerned that we follow the rules, and I'm well aware of Rule 27. And Rule 27 doesn't actually help us very much, because, as I say, are you going to be looking for 2/3 of some 320 odd members who may not have registered, who may not be connected, may not be even participating in this debate? And the Bureau, which is a democratic institution, it is elected by the membership, took the view, which was communicated to all the membership, and nobody has, to my knowledge, argued that point, communicated that to delegations. And I am not making up the rules, but if the Bureau making the arrangements as it's entitled to do for this session in extreme and emergency circumstances, comes to the conclusion that that is the way forward, then I have no alternative but to follow that. And I would say that it's a reasonable decision, because anything else is unreasonable and impractical. And I am deeply sorry if Mr. Tolstoy doesn't accept that. I would equally point out, as he mentioned, the quorum. Our rules do not help about the quorum because they do not explain how the quorum is decided. The fact of the matter is that, in fact, it is actually left to the president to decide. But I mean, we have, as I understand it, I think over 200 people registered and participating in this assembly. And it also says that it is the president's decision as to whether there is or is not a quorum. My decision is that there is a quorum on the basis of the figures given to me for participation. And I also, with the greatest possible respect, say to Mr. Tolstoy that when we met in Marrakesh as a Rules and Working Practices Subcommittee, we had a long meeting with his colleagues from the Russian Federation present, and we arrived at what we thought was a solution to solve this unsatisfactory quorum position. Because I agree it is unsatisfactory. It doesn't say how the quorum should be decided, and it's not satisfactory leaving it to the president to decide. But that's where we are. And we thought that after a long discussion, we had a conclusion. Some weeks thereafter, the delegation from the Russian Federation wrote to us and told us that, notwithstanding the fact that they had agreed it in our presence round the table, they no longer agreed it. And there was no explanation. When I became president, one of the first things that I did was to write to the Russian delegation, pointing all out that we had sought an agreement. We thought we had an agreement. One side reneged on that agreement and had not put forward any alternatives. And I invited the Russian Federation to write and communicate with us and tell us what their ideas were to resolve this problem, because it's a matter that we all need resolving. The Russian Federation wants it resolved. And I'm sure many of my colleagues want it resolved. I have not even had the courtesy of an acknowledgement of the letter, never mind any suggestion as to how it should be resolved. So I believe that we do all that we can within the rules and the constraints in which we operate. And I can only say to Mr. Tolstoy, I hope he will stay for the remainder of the meeting, but you know, whether he does or not is a matter for him and his colleagues. Certainly, I cannot change the decision of the Assembly to debate the matter, and I do not know what the outcome will be. And I suggest that if we all believe in democracy, we might have that vote and see where we are before we make any decisions without that knowledge. Thank you very much.
We have now Mr. Shavinik from Belarus, please.
Уважаемый господин председатель, я хотел бы сказать, что мы ошеломлены тем, что сейчас происходит в ходе нашего заседания. Прежде всего, я хочу сказать, что процедура голосования, процедура определения результатов этого голосования абсолютно не соответствует никаким демократическим стандартам. Я считаю, что вы напрасно называете эти процедуры демократическими. Те ограничения, которые вы сами признаете и сами упоминаете, по сути дела полностью подрывают прозрачность этого процесса. и заставляют нас усомниться в тех цифрах, которые мы видим на экране. У меня возникает масса вопросов. Вы говорите, что 200 человек участвуют в данном заседании с правом голоса. Но по первому вопросу голосуют 126 человек. По второй резолюции, по нашей резолюции, голосуют уже всего лишь 122 человека. И 83 это минимум должно быть 81 голос. Почему 4 человека не принимают участие в голосовании? Вы сами говорите о том, что вы не услышали выступления российской делегации. А что, если остальным участникам просто не удалось проголосовать по данной резолюции в силу вот этих несуразностей и проблем, которые возникают вообще с этим процессом? И я поддерживаю, не хочу это повторять, выступление российской делегации по кворуму и по всем остальным цифрам. В принципе, если мы действительно хотим сохранить взаимопонимание, атмосферу взаимодействия, нам как минимум просто-напросто надо отказаться от голосования по таким вызывающим конфронтацию вопросам до урегулирования всех правил процедуры. В противном случае мы рискуем просто-напросто разрушить те традиции взаимопонимания и консенсуса, которые сложились в рамках этой организации. Я убедительно прошу вас принять это к сведению. В противном случае у нас также возникают проблемы с участием в данном заседании. Благодарю за внимание.
Well, thank you very much. There's not a lot I can add to what I've already said, and I don't think members will want to hear it a second time. I just refute the suggestion that it's not democratic. In these circumstances, the Bureau has made arrangements. They've been communicated to delegations. Nobody has objected, and I have to point out that the Russian and Belarusian delegations received the same communications as everybody else, and until now, no issue has been raised. And so I can only proceed with this meeting on the instructions of the. Well, the instructions of the Standing Committee were not to put it on, but the appeal has been lodged. We have had a vote, and the decision was quite clear that these items should be included, and now we will have to proceed to a vote on the items themselves. I cannot say, I'm afraid, to the Belarusian delegation why there are differences in the figures. I guess that some people left the meeting and haven't voted. Some people have gone to do something else or gone offline. I mean, it's impossible to answer those questions. I would say, however, that the Secretariat have gone to considerable difficulty and care to engage technical firms who have put in the voting procedures, and I certainly can't. Certainly am not going to question those, but I can't answer the question about the difference in numbers. As I say, that could be any reason, because some people either choose not to vote and perhaps don't actually register their abstention, or they may leave the room. I think we're not going to get ourselves any further unless we now go on to dealing with the items themselves. Now, Mr. Polaris, Secretary.
Yes, you can proceed.
I have answered these points. Do you or any procedural advisors wish to make a different add to anything that I've said?
No, Mr. President, I think you can proceed and put the urgency items now to the vote.
Right, thank you. Well, we will do those one at a time. And let me say that the Assembly has decided that the following texts should be on the agenda. Mr. Cardin's resolution on rising hate, intolerance, violence and discrimination, the general approach to dissent in Belarus, and the destabilizing military buildup by the Russian Federation. The Assembly will now be asked to vote electronically on whether to approve or reject these items. I hope you will all agree that since the arguments in favor and against have already been made, well beyond the 1 minute that we set aside for or against speakers.
Mr. President, if I may, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
a request from Senator Cardin from the US.
And Mr. President, I might be able to save you a little bit of time on this resolution, because I think all the objections were procedural, and we may be able to do it by an expedited process. I will ask unanimous consent that a modification be accepted, which was negotiated by the delegation from Azerbaijan and Turkey. It's basically a technical change. It doesn't change the substance of the resolution. It puts the right emphasis on anti-Muslim instances. It eliminates the redundancy, and it eliminates some of the specific examples of historic injustices. I think it strengthens the resolution. The resolution is strong as it is, but it strengthens it. If we could get unanimous consent to make those modifications, we may be able to expedite this resolution without the necessity of a recorded vote.
Well, thank you, Senator Cardin. I am inevitably in the hands of the Assembly. This seems to be a manuscript amendment, which of course we have on our past procedures in traditional meetings have allowed them to go forward, provided there is no objection from anybody. I would propose, therefore, to ask the Assembly whether there are any objections to what you have suggested, and ask the Secretariat if they have any problem with that.
We don't see any objections here, Mr. President.
You see no objections, and I see no objections I see no requests in the chat line to ask any object. So that being the case, if the Assembly agrees, I am proposing to put the item rise in hate, intolerance, violence and discrimination against the OSCE region, proposed by Senator Cardin and as amended by agreement with the Assembly, proposing to put that to the vote to see whether, and I would ask whether anybody has any objection. Otherwise, I will declare this carried. I don't hear or see any objection. So can I say that this has been carried?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Senator Cardin and other colleagues who managed to negotiate agreement on the text. So, I'm now going to move to the general approach to dissent in Belarus, proposed by the Netherlands, and that will go to the vote. Again, since the arguments in favour have been made, we won't hear any additional speakers, and we will be hearing, we will need a second vote on the military buildup by the Russian Federation near the Ukraine. And the proposal is from the administration, and I hope this is going to work well, that in the interests of saving time, while these votes are taking place, we will hear about the election observations to Bulgaria, Albania, and Armenia during the consecutive votes. So, the vote on the general dissent in Belarus is open. And may I therefore, following on my suggestion, may I give the floor to Artur Gerasimov to report on the parliamentary elections in Bulgaria.
Thank you very much.
Artur, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, dear colleagues. First of all, I want to say thank you to both you and Chairperson Linda for entrusting me with the responsibility as special coordinator for the election observation mission in Bulgaria in April. I also want to say thank you to all OSCE observers who traveled to Bulgaria for the mission. But particularly, I want to say thank you to Pascal Alizar, who headed the OSCE delegation. And also I want to say thank you to the International Secretariat team who really supported our delegation and made huge support to any MP inside the delegation. I should also note that this was the first time that the OSCE held our pre-election briefings in an online format. Thank you also to the colleagues in the Council of Europe, PA and ODIHR for their close cooperation throughout the process. Our overall conclusion was that in the 4th April parliamentary elections, fundamental freedoms were respected. The elections were competitive, but massive use of state resources gave the ruling party a significant advantage. The campaign largely focused on personalities rather than platforms, and was marked by public disillusionment. Technical aspects of the elections were managed efficiently despite challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The legal framework provided for an adequate conduct of democratic elections. However, long-standing concerns pertaining to key aspects of the process had not been addressed. In addition, shortcomings in implementation undermined election dispute resolution and campaign finance oversight. Media lacked analytical reporting and offered limited editorial and news coverage of the campaign, impacting the ability of voters to make an informed choice. In the limited number of polling stations visited, the voting process was transparent with procedures largely followed. We note in our report that for the first time, voters were able to choose voting either by paper ballot or through an electronic device with a touch screen. We found this an interesting novelty, and overall, we found that this was implemented efficiently. We did not have systematic observation of election days, so we cannot draw full conclusions on this part of the process. However, it was clear that usage of the machines was very selective, with the machines in very active use in some places, and whereas in other locations, traditional paper ballots were almost entirely preferred. I also want to spend 1 minute to particularly consider the situation with media coverage and options. We noted that media ownership in Bulgaria was highly concentrated and was subject to political influence, which negatively impacted editorial diversity. Also, of course, we all know now that it was not possible to form a government following the April elections, and so we will be returning to observe new elections in just a few days. Thank you, Mr. President, again for trusting me with the responsibility to serve in a similar capacity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Artur. Does anybody from Bulgaria wish to comment on the report? No? I don't think you may not have caught that. I was saying we will move on to the report on the parliamentary elections in Albania and asking Vice President Guliev to report. Jose, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear President, dear colleagues. First of all, let me express my deepest gratitude to you and to Chairperson, Minister Linde, for entrusting me with the responsibility as Special Coordinator for the Election Observation Mission in Albania in late April. I would also like to thank all OECPA observers who traveled to Albania for the mission, as well as Reynold Lopatka, who headed the OECPA mission. Despite the difficulties posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, our OECPA delegation consisted of 60 delegates who deployed to several regions throughout the country. We joined efforts with colleagues from the ODIHR and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, whom I would like to thank for their great cooperation. In total, the International Election Observation Mission deployed some 125 observers on election day. Our overall conclusion was that in the 25 April early parliamentary elections in Albania, voters had a choice of candidates who were able to campaign freely under a legal framework which respected fundamental freedoms. The parliamentary elections were held following a breakthrough political agreement achieved in June 2020, which ended a long-standing political stalemate and was followed by electoral reform in July. Furthermore, these elections took place against the backdrop of ongoing accession talks with the European Union. It is notable that the July 2020 changes in the electoral code were based on a wide political consensus and followed an inclusive consultative process. However, further constitutional and electoral amendments in October 2020 were not proceeded by due consultation with stakeholders. Also, while a number of ODIHR and the Venice Commission recommendations were addressed during the reform, several recommendations remain outstanding. One of the main changes was the move towards the regional proportional representation system, with voters able to cast preferential votes for individual candidates in one of the 12 multi-member districts. The other crucial novelty was the introduction of the biometric identification of voters in all polling stations of the country, as well as the piloting the electronic voting and counting in 32 voting centers in Tirana. The extremely short time frame for implementation didn't allow, however, for substantive public discourse and independent scrutiny of the new technologies. A reformed Central Election Commission dedicated itself to overseeing the election process in an organized and transparent manner, despite significant new obligations, including the implementation of new technologies. We also underlined in our preliminary report that the ruling party derived a significant advantage from its incumbency, including through its control of local administrations and from the misuse of administrative resources. This was amplified by positive coverage of state institutions in the media. We noted that the campaign lacked vigor and messaging focused on the main party leaders rather than on genuine issue-driven discourse. Widespread practice of vote buying remained a problem, and a high number of investigations were opened in this regard. Also, the leaking of sensitive personal data, including the political preferences of citizens, was of serious concern and made voters vulnerable. Our observation mission noted that, positively, the main parties all attempted to augment the role and visibility of women as candidates in the campaign, and that the mandatory quotas in candidates' lists were respected and in most cases exceeded, In addition, efforts were made to appeal to women as voters. However, women were underrepresented throughout the election administration. In the limited number of polling stations visited by our observers, the election process was calm and smooth, and the secrecy of the vote was mostly respected. In the limited number of counts observed, the process was assessed as largely transparent and smooth. Dear colleagues, dear friends, in conclusion, I would like to sincerely thank Secretary General Roberto Mantello and the staff of the International Secretariat, particularly Francesco Pagani, Stefani Kolchanov, Anna Di Domenico, Freya Kochi, Daria Boyarskoya, Angelika Ivanchekova, and Ilias Trodis for their tremendous support and professional expertise in fulfilling my duty as Special Coordinator and the head of the short-term observation mission in Albania. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Jose. I can now declare the result of the vote on the. I can now declare the result on the. I'm sorry, I'm just. I can now declare the result of the vote on the resolution relating to dissent in Belarus. In favor, 86 votes, against 18, and 11 abstentions, which means that of the votes cast, 74.78% were in favor of the resolution, and the urgency item is therefore adopted. We now proceed to the main last item, which is the destabilizing military buildup by the Russian Federation near Ukraine in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sebastopol, Ukraine, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, proposed by Mr. Potereev. The voting platform will be open for 10 minutes. And whilst that voting is taking place, we will listen to a report from Vice President Sederfeld on the elections in Armenia. Margareta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, thank you, Mr. President and Chairperson in Office, Foreign Minister Ms. Ann Linde, for entrusting me with the responsibility as Special Coordinator for the Election Observation Mission in Armenia this late June. I would also like to thank all OSCE PA observers who traveled to Armenia for the mission, as well as Vice President Ms. Kari Henriksen, who headed the OSCE PA delegation. It was a pleasure working all together, and I highly appreciate our cooperation. I do as well express my thanks to the OSCE PA Secretariat for all your efforts and support during this election. Thank you so much. I believe it is also important to note that this was the first time since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic that we had a full-fledged international election observation mission with more than 300 short-term observers deployed through all over Armenia, almost except the contact line and some special parts where it was not decided as safe to send observers. From the observers, 300 short-term observers were from OSCE UDIR and the Parliamentary Assembly. I think it is very positive sign that we are progressively returning to normal status with our election observation activity. While we continue to pay particular attention at ensuring the safety of all our observers and of all the citizens we meet during our missions. I do as well express my thank you to colleagues in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the ODIHR Secretariat for your close cooperation throughout the whole election observation during the mission. Our overall conclusion was that the 20 June early parliamentary elections were competitive and generally well managed within a short time frame. However, the elections were characterized by intense polarization and marred by increasingly inflammatory rhetoric among key contestants. We found that the legal framework is generally comprehensive, but the fact that amendments were adopted close to the election caused some legal uncertainty. We also noted that the election administration conducted its work in a transparent, collegial, and professional manner and enjoy electoral stakeholders' confidence. Voters were provided with a broad range of options, and fundamental rights and freedom were generally respected, with contestants being able to campaign freely. The negative tone and the personality-driven nature of the campaign, however, hindered a policy-focused debate. Generally, women were sidelined throughout the campaign. Election day included the vote count was assessed positively overall by our observers. We also noted in our report that the electoral code was amended in April and May 2021. Shortly before elections were called, and that positively, the changes had been publicly debated and advocated and were supported by most political parties and civil society groups. Public outreach on the proposed electoral reforms was largely perceived as inclusive. However, the late adoption of Parliament and the decision by the President not to sign the amendments affected legal certainty and left limited time for implementing regulations and informing voters on new procedures. Most notably, the April amendments to the Electoral Code eliminated open territorial lists of candidates with corresponding procedural changes, including to candidates' registration, distribution of mandates, and election day procedures, and established instead a closed list proportional system within a single nationwide constituency. A second, more comprehensive package of the amendments was adopted 7th May 2021. And while it was not applicable to these elections, it will take effect for the next elections. Among other issues, the amendments related to the campaign finance, as well as the threshold for the representation in Parliament. Turning to the general aspects of representation, in an inclusive process, the CEC registered the candidate list of 22 political parties and 4 alliances, with a total of 2,623 candidates, including 965 women. It should be noted that all lists fully complied with the 30% gender requirement. However, despite the 30% gender quota, women have been notably sidelined in campaign events, rarely participating as speakers. Further, there were an observable absence of message targeting women and national minority groups during the whole campaign. Thank you, Mr. President, again for trusting me with the responsibility to serve in the capacity of Special Coordinator of the Observation Mission to this important election in Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margareta. Can I ask whether any member from the Armenian delegation wishes to comment?
Yes, Mr. President, if I may.
Thank you. Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. dear colleagues, dear Mr. President, I would like to thank OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for this mission, for election observation mission in Armenia. I want to thank all the members of Parliamentary Assembly who arrived in Armenia and who observed all the process. These elections were held in very tense times for Armenia, and the results of elections and all the process of elections showed again that strengthening democracy is one of the top priorities for Armenia, and we'll be committed to all our goals to strengthen and to develop democratic institutions in our country. For Armenia and for Armenian people, we reaffirmed once again that we are devoted to that, we are committed to democracy, to human rights and freedoms. And in upcoming future, we are going to continue all reforms that we initiated, and I'm sure that we'll strengthen our democracy and democratic institutions. And again, I want to thank you for being with us in this process, and thank you for your observation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we are waiting merely for the result of the vote on the resolution from Ukraine. And I have to say, I'm afraid that it appears that we are going to run out of time. This is not totally unexpected. The suggestion is that we do not have a general debate. It's the only way that we can get through the business. We would nevertheless hear from the ad hoc committees and special representatives, and then move on to what is actually, of course, the most important part of today's meeting, in many ways, the election results. And I would suggest that speakers who are intended to contribute to the general debate have the opportunity to share their remarks in writing, and that these would be circulated by the Secretariat to all members. I'm very sorry. I know that members will be disappointed about this, but there are limits as to how long we can carry on. Not least, we will have no interpretation after half past 4 Vienna time, and I think that would be unfortunate, and we would have to start picking and choosing who we allowed to speak. So I am not going to carry on. That's my suggestion, unless anybody wishes to say anything to the contrary. In the meanwhile, I can announce the result of the ballot on the resolution of destabilizing military build-up by the Russian Federation proposed by Ukraine. And I can tell you that there were 78 votes cast in favor of the resolution. There were 22 votes cast against, and there were 12 abstentions, which means that of the votes cast, 69.64% were in favor, which is in excess of
Mr. President, we don't hear you, but there's a point of order from Mr.
I'm sorry. I think I lost you for a moment. And so on that vote, the resolution is passed and placed upon the resolution has been passed by the Assembly. Sorry, Roberto, you wanted to say something.
Yes, there's a point of order from Mr. Jabarov from the Russian Federation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jabarov.
Mr. Zavarov?
You're muted, Mr. Jabarov. We don't hear you.
I still can't hear Mr. Zavarov.
Yeah, no, Maria is helping him. Maria is helping him get his audio on.
While you're trying to get Mr. Zavarov, can I just, I think I said when I announced the result that 78 votes were more than 2/3. Of course, the item only required a majority of the votes cast. And having achieved that, it's been adopted by the Assembly. If I said 2/3, I apologize.
Решение, принятое в нарушении регламента меньшинством, и считаем, что оно заведомо нелегитимно, ничтожным, и мы больше не будем участвовать в продолжении работы и, поддерживая своего руководителя, отключаемся от видеоконференции. Спасибо.
I'm not sure we heard the
We
interpretation.
had no interpretation.
Mr. Jabarov, would you care to just repeat what you just said, please? Mr. Jabarov, we didn't hear your intervention. If you can repeat it, please.
Уважаемый господин председатель, российская делегация считает, что решение, принятое меньшинством голосов участников парламентской ассамблеи, заведомо нелегитимно, поскольку принято в нарушении регламента. И мы не будем участвовать в видеодискуссии и поддерживаем позицию руководителя нашей делегации Петра Толстого. Мы покидаем заседание видеоконференции. Спасибо.
Well, I'm sorry that you were unable to accept the explanation that we've been given. I'm genuinely sorry that you're leaving the meeting, and I hope that upon reflection you'll understand that the decisions that have been made in good faith and with the appropriate democratic voting by the Bureau and the Assembly itself in due order. We will therefore now leave the urgent items. We have had the reports from Bulgaria, Albania, and Armenia observation missions. We are deploying 2 missions shortly after this meeting, one to Bulgaria and the other to Moldova. And I thank everybody who has participated in those missions, and particularly those who've either led our delegations or acted as special coordinators. We can move now quickly to 5.2, the ad hoc committees, and I give the floor to Mrs. Vice President Sederfeld to report on the ad hoc committee on migration.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will try to be brief as we are running out of time. The report is sent out. You can find it, dear colleagues, under the report, the headline report in the OSCE PA app. But I would like as well to say thank you, Mr. President, for the trust in me. And I would also say thank you for the trust in the committee, as it's the president who appoint members of the committee. And there is a list in the report of members of the ad hoc committee on migration. And it has been my true pleasure to work together with dear colleagues in the ad hoc committee. I would also like to say thank you to Ms. Farima Daftari from the OSCE PA Secretariat for all her efforts and engagement for the work of the committee. And thank you, Secretary General Roberto Montella, for taking part in our meetings and the interest you have shown. the work of the committee have very much been affected by the COVID-19, as we haven't been able to perform any field visits, but we have been active both on meetings inside the committee and also on webinars and meetings with the guests and civil societies, with experts, with governments, with parliaments. Our focus have been on particular countries and regions, as there are areas where it's crucial. Let me just mention Bosnia-Herzegovina. That's one region we have focused on. And there is also the situation with pushbacks, where we have noticed that people who are who are arriving are pushed back in a very heavily way. And we focused on this because we see it as people, asylum seekers' rights are violated. I would also like to say that we have had a focus on the situation on Canary Island, where it have been in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta, over 8,000 persons who have crossed over from Morocco in 2 days period. And 1,005 of them were minors. Let me go further on to say that I thank you to the head of the Spanish delegation, Mr. Pons, for his cooperation in these issues. And I would also like to say that it's a need for a stronger displays of solidarity between the EU member states. I would also like to mention Greece and the situation on Lesbos. As dear colleagues, you might remember about the situation that was in the Aegean Island and with refugees who need protection. And it was also a prevention for the outbreak of COVID. And I would like to thank the member in the committee, Mr. Dimitrios Markopoulos from Greece, for his engagement in facilitating. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for facilitating our discussions. And we have also had a meeting with a committee member, Ms. Gwen Moore from US, who briefed us about the situation in US and the Mexican border. And with Mr. Kyriakos Hadianos from Cyprus, who is head of the third committee, but as well member of the Committee on Migration. And he have faced the situation in Greece, and not Greece, I mean in the Republic of Cyprus. And from the Turkish delegation, I would like to thank Mr. Mehmet Said Kirasoglu for the cooperation on migration. And dear delegates, I would also like to mention that there is a need to fight against trafficking in human beings, because we have noticed during this period that there is an increase and risk for human trafficking, particularly for women and children, but also for men. And this is, of course, a very serious issue that we as parliamentarians need to be engaged in. I would also like to highlight that there is a high level of smugglers who are using the situation that have occurred during the COVID-19 with blocked borders. And this is another issue that we need to pay attention to. We have worked closely with Mr. Valiant Ritchie, who is Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings in OSCE. And I do encourage that we continue to find ways to work together with OSCE in these important issues. And we have had a cooperation. We've been invited by the United Kingdom House of Lords and have taken part in meetings and public meetings with the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Europe initiated by the committee vice chair, Lord Alf Dubs, and it has been very fruitful cooperation. I would also like to mention that, as I mentioned earlier, about Bosnia-Herzegovina, it looks like it will be possible to perform a field visit, and the committee's vice chair, Dr. Gudrun Kugler, will take part in one of those visits. And I would also like to mention that Dr. Heidi Fry's participation have really been crucial for the committee because of her strong knowledge among violence against women and gender perspective. And this is another issue that needs to be highlighted in the further work of the committee. And I would like to stop here because time is running, but thank you once again, dear colleagues, for the cooperation. And our work is also ended in person as our president have recognized that it's important that the next president will work with this issue and appoint new members. And I think we have done a very good job together. And I say once again, thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much, Vice President Sederfeld, and thank you for the work you've been doing, and indeed all the members of your committee. I now give the floor to Reinhard Lopakter to report on the activities of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism. Mr. Lopakter, you have the floor.
Yeah, dear President, dear Secretary General, it's 4 o'clock and 10 minutes, so I'm very brief. The fight against terrorism is so important that I even asked you at that time for some minutes. I will try to convey our priority lines of our work and to update you on our most recent efforts. Jihadist propaganda and right-wing extremists both suggested different ways to use the virus against different targets. Stringent health containment measures fueled anti-establishment protests in many of our countries. Jihadist movements exploited the issue of discrimination in Western societies to prevent themselves as an alternative protecting the rights of the oppressed. While very different in terms of structure and core objectives, right-wing extremists unite against diversity and the democratic constitutional order. Right-wing propaganda is mainly disseminated online, and gaming platforms have been increasingly used for spreading extremist and terrorist narratives. Ultimately, prolonged instability in many parts of Africa and the Middle East continue to provide a fertile ground for terrorist organizations to establish and maintain dangerous footholds. Dear colleagues, to discuss this set of complex challenges efficiently, it is paramount to stand united. Despite the limitations posed by the pandemic, I am pleased to report that the CCT has remained very active since our winter meeting. Firstly, we should pursue to play a leading role in promoting the successful prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration of foreign terrorist fighters. To advance our engagement in this field and share important lessons learned, on 18th May, we held a dedicated parliamentary hearing to examine the experience of Kazakhstan in repatriating, prosecuting, and rehabilitating and reintegrating FTFs, together with the OSCE program office in Nur Sultan. On a similar note, we are planning in October a counterterrorism policy dialogue with legislatures from Southeastern Europe, together with the OSCE Transnational Threats Department. Secondly, we should continue to support our countries in developing and implementing sound advanced passenger information, passenger name records, and biometric data management systems in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 2396. Also in this context, parliamentarians should play an important legislative and oversight functions. So we are considering a follow-up parliamentary oversight initiative for 2022 to evaluate national efforts in this context. We did such an oversight very successfully in 2019. Thirdly, we shall enhance our prevention efforts, especially online, against the backdrop of growing online radicalization. It is paramount to develop sensible global parameters and guidance to counter violent content, both online and offline. To further explore all these issues and consider joint strategy with our partners, we have organized a special debate on assessing the terrorist threat and efforts to prevent violent extremism, together with the Parliamentary Assembly of Mediterranean at the International Parliamentary Conference on Countering Terrorism in April. And fourthly, supporting the victims of terrorism is another field where we can play a strong role. National parliaments should develop sound legislation and strengthen victims' associations' role in this field, which play a critical role in terms of advocacy and awareness, raising on the rights of victims of terrorism. Building on the findings of our 2018 Madrid conference and our official visits to Belgium and Norway, we took a leading role in several expert consultations with the United Nations in late 2020 and early 21. And as I have mentioned it in previous reports, the intersection of terrorism with other serious threats, such as bioterrorism, terrorist financing, nuclear proliferation, and hybrid threats will also remain in the focus of our work. In this context, and to come to an end, I want to mention two, for me, very important points. The first is our cooperation with the OSCE, which is excellent, and we are planning different projects for the next months. And the second thing is, because United Nations, they have here a leading role, our collaboration with the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, building on the MOU signed in February 2020, we have co-organized several activities and cooperated on a wide range of issues during the last year. So to conclude, I really thank our Secretary General and his staff, and especially Marco Bonabello, whose support was always instrumental and essential to our work, as well as to my fellow colleagues. Many of our colleagues were engaged in a way I had never expected when we work together with PAM, when we work together with UNOCT or UNODC. So thank you very much for this strong support, and I think we should continue with this work because it is necessary to continue.
Thank you very much indeed for your report, and thank you for all the work which you and your committee have been doing. We're all particularly grateful. Now, members, the next item on the agenda are reports of the special representatives, but it's quite clear to me that we are not going to be able to deal with everybody on the list, and because we will, I anticipate having the results of the election very shortly, and I think that you would want that whilst we have interpreters and before the meeting is due to close. So let me in advance apologize to special representatives who don't get called, and suggest that any reports which they have be distributed by the Secretariat to the membership. I'm currently awaiting notification of the results. To make good use of that time, whilst not seeking to prefer anyone, can I take the first special representative on my list? And that is Senator Cardin. Senator Cardin, may I respectfully ask you?
Mr. President, Senator Cardin, as Chris Smith will speak.
Right. Well, all right. Can I, Mr. Smith, can I ask you if you would like to speak on this subject as briefly as we possibly can, because I see that the abstentions are beginning to come in. I'm sorry, the votes are beginning to come in. And when I have them all, I think the Assembly will want to hear them. So
I'll be very brief, Mr.
Congressman
President.
Smith.
I'll be very brief, and I have a longer report I hope people will look through. Obviously, the pandemic has had a serious impact on anti-trafficking efforts, on patterns of trafficking, on victims, and on survivors. We know that many children in school have been groomed and are being groomed for exploitation. And the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, did issue a very strong warning about this. And a number of NGOs have come up with very good situationally aware efforts to make people, especially parents, knowledgeable about this. I would ask you to continue a couple of things we have done here in the United States. We have educated, and in 2019, I got a law passed called the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Act. It provides $430 million over 4 years, and it has a big emphasis on training our children and our educators so that they are situationally aware to avert trafficking situations. We also passed in 2016 International Megan's Law, named after a young girl from my own district, from my own hometown of Hamilton Township, New Jersey. She was murdered and raped in 1994 by a sex offender who lived across the street. Nobody knew that, not her family, not anyone else in the neighborhood. All 50 states now have a Megan's Law requiring sex offenders to register with local authorities upon release from prison. International Megan's Law takes the lessons we've learned and expands them to protect children abroad through an efficient system that is consistent with the civil liberties of perpetrators, warns foreign law enforcement of traveling sex offenders. Remember, these are all convicted individuals, and it has made a difference. Over 100 countries have been notified of these traveling, what used to be more invisible. 13,000 convicted child predators we've noticed countries since 2016. And empowered with this information, almost half, 5,500, were denied entry. Concerned that some may fail to include their true destination when filing with the US government. And out of abundance of concern for children, International Megan's Law requires that their passports contain the message that the quote bearer was convicted of a sex offense against a minor child. International Megan's Law mitigates the invisibility of child sex tourism, and I do hope all of you will look to be part of this program and even do a similar program yourself. Val Ritchie did a great job, and I spoke at 2 side events during the OSCE Alliance Against Trafficking Conference. He wrote a very good piece on combating demand, and I encourage people on this call, on this WebEx, to take a look at it. Finally, I welcome the recent establishment of the International, like you, welcome the International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council. I began working on combating human trafficking back in the mid-1990s. After meeting and listening to survivors, I was and continue to be, like you, greatly moved by their extraordinary courage, their resiliency, and their fervent hope that no one ever suffer the cruelty that they have endured. Survivors are the real experts. Their voices inspire, motivate, and inform our policies and make them more effective. I hope that all of you will consider a survivors group in your own countries. We who have one in the United States, I again just met with them 2 weeks ago, and they provide amazing insights as to what we should be doing to try to prevent trafficking, protect the victims, and prosecute the perpetrators. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and I do hope you'll look at the longer version of my report. Yield back.
Congressman Smith, thank you very much indeed for your report. I still haven't got all the results, so I will ask now Mr. Oscar Mina, Special Rapporteur on Disinformation and Propaganda, whether if he's present and whether he has a report to make, and if so, please make it as brief as possible.
Mr. Mina is not here, Mr. President.
Right, okay. I think Dr. Heidi Fry is not present, is she?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Heidi, I apologize.
That's all right.
I apologize. May we have your report, please? As
Thank
short
you
as
very
possible,
much.
because I've nearly got the results.
Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure, and I want to thank Lord Bonas for letting me continue as General Representative during his term of office. I have two documents. There is my report, and then there is an addendum called a call to action, which is action plans pertaining to the report. I want you to know that I have served as a member of Parliament in Canada since 1993, held a variety of ministerial positions, including gender equality and status of women. And all of these years, I still remain passionate about this issue. Now, I wanted to give you a list of my activities. I have had 9 opportunities to be a panelist during this year. And they have been on issues as wide-ranging as gender-sensitive visas, women in nuclear disarmament, women in peace, economic impact and labor market participation of women during COVID, on refugees and evidence-based lawmaking for preventing and combating violence against women, and on the economic, social, and cultural effects of the pandemic on women. And these have all been exciting, and they've all been moving forward. My focus in this report this year is going to be about the violence against women, journalists, and politicians. This has escalated during COVID and in the last year and a half. And I just, alongside my report, you will see this call to action, because I have always said we shouldn't just talk, we should also look at action. Quickly, I wanted to tell you that my findings on looking at violence against women, politicians, and journalists have found that women in journalism and politics share many similarities. They operate in the public eye, they have the power to influence public life, and they work in spaces that have been traditionally reserved for men. My findings are troubling. Violence is widespread and intensifying. We know that an Interparliamentary Union survey of women politicians revealed that 80% had experienced psychological violence. Many of these are made in Parliament, and some of them are made by male colleagues. And we want to recall an ugly exchange in July 2020 on the steps of the United States Capitol building, when former Representative Ted Yoho approached Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, called her disgusting, and called her a sexist name, which I cannot repeat here. This kind of gendered verbal abuse is too common in the halls of power. I want to talk about the fact that we know that in Belarus, the leader of the opposition, Tikhanovskaya, has been threatened with sexual violence many times. We have seen the death of MP Cox in the United Kingdom, and Diana Abbott, the first Black woman to become a member of Parliament in the UK. 45% of all abuse and sexual innuendo was again targeting her. I think online violence, social media has enhanced this, it has highlighted, and we see that this is something that is now being impacted by civil society, who continue to threaten. We've seen murder, we've seen death, we've seen sexual violence. I think the third finding is what the impact of this violence is. I think it's a great threat to women. It's a great threat to democracy and civic participation of women. And I think that, the human rights of women, as we recall in 1995 in the Beijing conference, this is has an impact on their rights. I want you to say that there are things we can do quickly to challenge the men in Parliament and challenge male colleagues of journalists that, in fact, you have to be valuable allies. Fortunately, there are many of you who are valuable allies. And I think that what we want to do is to listen today and to say we're partners. 51% of our planet is populated by women. We're a majority, but together we bring a different perspective. Men and women see problems differently and see solutions differently. Together we give a 360-degree view of the world. Together we can make change for all society. Thank you.
Heidi, thank you very much indeed for your report and all the work that you have done in this year and indeed in previous years. Before we go to the results, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring the reports of special representatives to a conclusions, but I would like to ask Toril Eidson, the special representative on the Arctic, who is leaving the Assembly, whether she would like to make a very short report before I close this item.
Thank you so much, Mr. President and Mr. Secretary General, colleagues and dear friends. It is in a spirit of gratitude that I briefly take the floor today, as this is my last intervention as your special representative on Arctic issues. As you know, we've managed to raise awareness of the effects of climate crisis on the Arctic and also beyond. Actually, we've seen that we need to ring an alarm bell. And I strongly believe in promoting a more effective role of parliamentarians in addressing it, including within the OSCE EPA. While we are about to learn to refer to the climate changes as a climate crisis, Arctic communities are already calling it a climate disaster. And so this deserves our awareness. At the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in May this year, the Arctic countries once again showed the constructive spirit of Arctic cooperation, addressing many of the challenges facing the region. However, the consequences of Arctic climate change has a global impact, including security issues. I feel confident that the OSCE EPA will manage to step up its efforts on environmental security along the lines that what the second committee is already doing. So I think we need to prioritize this on the multilateral agenda and instill a sense of urgency. As parliamentarians, there is a lot that we can do, and I am assured that the next president will maintain an attentive eye to peculiarities of the Arctic being so much more than just a mass of ice. Please do never forget, the Arctic is actually the home of more than 4 million people, all OSCE citizens. Mr. President and dear colleagues, I reported on my activities 2 months ago during the Bureau. So furthermore, I'm preparing a comprehensive report on my activities with some food for thoughts for all of you and concrete recommendations based on my work on the Arctic and also the climate changes. I will circulate this to you in September before ceasing my membership in the Assembly. I hope this will be useful for your future engagement on this portfolio. In conclusion, it has been an honor to serve you in this role. My interlocutors have showed great interest in what the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly can do, and thank you all for your contribution and also your effort. Politics is a service and also a responsibility we should seize with courage. We should challenge our ability to think far ahead, maintain the trust and the hope, keeping our further generations in mind. Thank you all for the cooperation and thank you also for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, very much indeed. And I know that all the Assembly will wish to extend their good wishes to you outside the Norwegian Parliament and whatever it is that you're doing. So, can I?
Mr. President, I'm sorry. We have another special representative here, Irene Karalambidis, on fighting corruption.
Yes, I appreciate that, but I thought we had very well. I thought we had decided to close the list. I can't live like this. Karalambidis then.
It's up to you, Mr. President. I don't want to make it hard for you. If you want to proceed with the results, I will not, I do not have any objections. If you want me to give the report on fighting corruption, I will do that. If you do not, it's okay.
Well, I would very much like to hear your report, but I thank you for your cooperation. Because we are running out of time, and I think that whilst we would like to have your report, I think members want to hear the results of the.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
So I'm very grateful to you for your cooperation, and to all the other special representatives who haven't had the opportunity. If there are any there present, I apologize. And of course, we will make sure that any reports that you have and that you wish to have circulated are circulated to the members of the Assembly. And so, colleagues, now I move to elections, item number 7, and I can now deal with the outcome of the votes that have been cast in the elections. Voting closed at 1600 Vienna time, and I'm sorry. Yes, vote closed at 1600 Vienna time, and let me just go through this and announce those who've been elected by acclamation. As treasurer of the OSCE EPA, Peter Juel Jensen from Denmark. In the first committee, as chairman, Congressman Hudson from the United States. As vice chair, Costel Dunava from Romania. And as rapporteur, Laurimas Kaskianos from Lithuania. I congratulate them on their election. In the second committee, as chair, Pierre Jean Juan Pons from Spain has been elected chair by acclamation, and as vice chair, Artur Gerasamos from Ukraine. In the third committee, the vice chair, Michael Link from Germany, and as rapporteur, Johan Busse from Sweden. All those whom I've announced have been elected by acclamation without any electoral contest, and I congratulate them on that. I will now announce the results of the following elections. For the second committee rapporteur, 83 votes were cast. Gudrun Kugler from Austria received 38 votes. Luigi Agosori from Italy received 32 votes and 13 abstentions. And I therefore declare that Gudrun Kugler was elected as the second committee rapporteur. Congratulations, Ms. Kugler. For the third committee chair, 84 votes were cast, and as follows: Serine Mauboin from France, 43 votes; Kyriakos Hadjani from Cyprus, 38 votes, with 3 abstentions. And I therefore declare that Madame Mauboin from France is elected as the third committee chair. I now proceed to the vice president, the elections for vice presidents, which you will recall, the election will determine the length of the term, depending on the number of votes cast. So in the first instance, those vice presidents elected for 3 years until the end of 2024 session are as follows. Senator Wicker, United States, with 172 votes. There's Pierre Kalmar from Finland with 169 votes. And Reinhard Lapacta from Austria with 162 votes. So congratulations to those new vice presidents. Elected for 2 years until the end of 2023 are Pascal Alizard with 153 votes, Daniela Dorida from Germany, 152 votes, and Askar Shakirov from Kazakhstan with 133 votes. And congratulations to those 3 vice presidents. And elected for 1 year until the end of the 2022 session, i.e. 12 months from now, is Madam Sharon-Bidis from Cyprus with 126 votes, and Christian Vinegan from Bulgaria with 120 votes. And I congratulate them on their election. And now I turn to the election for which no doubt everybody is waiting, great anticipation, the result of the election for the new president. And the result is as follows: 261 votes. Margareta Söderfeld, Vice President Söderfeld, 128 votes. And Vice President Kari Henriksson, 126 votes and 7 abstentions. And I therefore declare that Vice President Margareta Söderfeld is elected as President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for the coming 12 months. I offer my congratulations to the new president, to all the vice presidents and all the other persons who've been elected to serve this assembly. Vice President Söderfeld, or President-elect Söderfeld, until I actually close this meeting, do you wish to say anything to the assembly? I don't hear anything from Madam Söderfeld.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I was just taking a short break for a few seconds. I would like to say thank you, dear colleagues, for your trust, for your vote. I thought the whole time that it will be a very equal result. And it was an equal result. But anyway, I am very humble. I am very grateful for your support. And my promise to you is to continue to work as I have done since I did my first election mission, 2008. I will work for accountability. I will work for trustability, and I will work for respect of every country among the 57 member countries in OSCE. I believe that OSCE as a security organization is unique. A regional organization with 57 member countries, from Vladivostok to Vancouver. It's amazing, and we are all elected parliamentarians by our citizens. It means that we have a huge responsibility, and we have to act as can be respected of us. I would also like to say that the broad security perspective of OSCE is a strength for us to have the perspective based on the Helsinki agreement and the Paris Charter, to work for a secure region with respect for every country's territorial integrity, to work with respect for human rights, to work for respect of democracy. And here I think, of course, for our very famous and well-run election observations. But I would also like to include here, that was raised earlier, the climate change. We as parliamentarians, we have a huge responsibility to work for this. And these days, our region, just as the rest of the world, is affected by the COVID-19. Hopefully, the vaccine, the improvement based on research, on knowledge, on companies, on professionals, will find an end. But we need to continue to secure that our region are a safe place also after COVID, and it's recovered, because all of those people who have lost friends, relatives, maybe their job, maybe it's a terrible situation, that they have trust for the future. That's our responsibility. I would also like to say, I have talked about this during these days. It's not I, as president, who is doing our organization. It's all of us that we need to continue to work, from the national delegation, from my colleagues in the bureau, and of course, dear secretariat. The work you do is absolute crucial for our job. And I look forward to cooperate with Secretary General Roberto Montella, as well as the rest of the secretariat. But I would also like to say, because I have thought about this, I will be 62 years old, but I am very happy because I have a husband and I have 2 children and I have just received 2 grandchildren. It's a huge responsibility. But I must also say that it's thanks to my husband and his support that I have managed to be a member of parliament for a very long time and have managed to reach this position as president of OSCE PA. And in this perspective, I just would like to mention that it's also my parents. I am brought up in the spirit of the Cold War. We haven't had a war in Sweden, but we have had a Cold War. I have seen the neighbor countries in the Baltic states, in Poland. I have seen the Eastern Germany. I have seen former Soviet Union. And this means that my belief in democracy is very, very strong. And I can tell you, when I was elected first in my parliament for the OSCE region, for the Swedish OSCE delegation, my father, he said, that's good, then you can continue to fight for a secure region. And that was something that I have brought with me. My first election observation, it was in Georgia, 2008. I noticed there what a war make for a country, how people suffer. And I did the election observation together with Miss Rosa Utonbayeva from Kyrgyzstan, later president of Kyrgyzstan, and she learned me a lot. I am grateful for her support and to be together with her for that mission. And now time is running. So I would just like to say, thank you once again, dear colleagues, and thank you, dear Kari. You are a very dear colleague. We have worked together for several years, and I can ensure that your contribution for OSCE PA will continue because your belief, your strength is needed in OSCE PA. I look forward to further cooperation with you. Thank you. And I wish all of you a happy summer and let's continue the work. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Margareta, and you know that you have the good wishes of all the members of the Assembly in taking up the reins of the presidency. It's now for me to close this meeting. I would only make one observation, that in my incarnation before acting president, being the chairman of the Rules and Working Practices Committee, this meeting has taken 3 hours to convince me how much we need to revise the rules so that no other president in the future is faced with some of the questions that I've had today, or if they do, they've got better answers than I have been able to give. However, I've given them to the best of my ability and believing that we were acting as we should. I thank you all for your support. I thank you for your attention. And like Margareta, I wish you all a very good summer. As I say, thank you for your support while I've been doing this job. And I look forward to seeing you, hopefully when we are working normally. I bid you farewell. And I understand the Secretary General wished to say something before I actually close the meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. President. I just wanted to express my deepest appreciation for your service as President of the Assembly. You've carried the Assembly through after George Serratelli was not elected in Georgia in honor, and you really helped us carry this remote annual session in very difficult circumstances. Thank you very much for leading us to here. And we, of course, look forward to working with the newly elected Bureau. And the last word of appreciation to the entire staff of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. If you can all stand and come here, we'll take a picture with all of you and the newly elected members of the Bureau. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roberto. And as a really last word, thank you for all the interpreters if they are still with us.
They are still here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Farewell.
Staff, please come here, and members who are in the room who have been elected, please come here.